Good evening. My name is Malcolm Clemens Young. I'm the Dean of Grace Cathedral here in San Francisco, California. Welcome to the Spring Forum. There are numerous books that offer an historical account of Anglican theology or that detail the lives and works of particular Anglican theologians. Books that focus on the nature and character of Anglican theology itself, however, are hard to find. My guest today, Dr. Scott MacDougall, fills that gap with his book, The Shape of Anglican Theology, Faith Seeking Wisdom. He examines what makes Anglican theology Anglican, beginning with how Anglican theology does and does not differ from other types of Christian theology. Ultimately, the contents that he contends that Anglican theology is best understood not as faith-seeking understanding, as Anselm famously said, but as faith-seeking wisdom. This wisdom is chiefly concerned with discerning faithful ways of being Christian in circumstances where clear answers to complicated questions can be difficult to find. Tonight, we're going to be talking about what makes Anglican theology Anglican and about being faithful in a complicated world. Scott, I'm so grateful to see you. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
I appreciate the invitation to be here. It's a pleasure and a joy. Thank you very much.
Every time I would see you in a public setting, I wanted to kind of like just talk to you in the corner about all these things, and now I finally have my chance.
All yours.
I'm so glad because I, like I said, I was meaning to go over to Berkeley and spend time with you in a cafe and really begin to understand something of your story. So I'm so grateful for you for being on the show tonight.
Thank you again for the invitation.
Now, I don't know where this question came from, out of the deep depths of my own subconscious, but I wonder if you could talk about kind of your first idea of God and why you're thinking about that. I mean, maybe from probably from childhood. I just remember my mother talking about God and me just saying, that is absolutely ridiculous. Huh. Like, how can God be in more than one place? And how can God be everywhere? And, so I remember being under the age of 7 and just kind of thinking that my parents were talking about nonsense.
That's so funny.
So what was your first recollection?
I honestly, I've never thought about that question. But when I think back on it, I wasn't baptized until I was 3, and I don't remember it. So even though I was on the a toddler when I was baptized, not as an infant. My parents sort of started going back to church around the time that I was about 3 years old. My younger brother and I were baptized at the same time. I don't recall ever not having God in my life. Like I don't remember that being an absence at all. And so the idea that there was, and I never thought of it as a sort of eye in the sky sort of surveillance, maybe a little bit like in those Sunday school years probably, but not too much. It was more of this, I've never thought about this before, Malcolm, it's so funny. It was more of this all prevailing sense that of meaning and purpose, even if I couldn't talk about what it was. Like the world never seemed empty. When we talk about in terms of after the 18th century, we talk about the Enlightenment and we talk about the lack of enchantment in the world. Yeah. I never experienced that. I never felt like the world was disenchanted. I mean, if I did, it wasn't until later, when sort of like an intellectualist notion sort of took over and I began to think in different ways. But even so, I never really thought of God as absent. It was that God was all prevailing. Now, I couldn't have described that. I couldn't have said anything positive. I couldn't have said anything concrete about what that meant. But I would have said that, how would I put this? It certainly would not have been in Trinitarian terms. And I had a hard time, I think, in that sense, like God made more sense to me than Jesus as God, for example. That took longer. But the notion that there is a creator and the notion that the creator cares and that this cosmos has significance to that creator who is not gone, though I did wonder, as a good Methodist, why God was no longer talking to us anymore and that kind of thing in the ways that the Bible depicts. God didn't feel absent. I felt unable to be in proper contact. It's like that was really, but I've never really thought through what my conception of God as a young person was. It's more like, what was my conception of meaning? How was meaning made? God just always seemed incomprehensible. And so I always thought of God as a great mystery, which is one of the reasons why Methodism didn't work for me as a child, because it is so deeply Protestant, and it, in my experience of it, lacks the kind of liturgical solemnity that this all prevailing mystery requires of us. And so modes of worship were really hard for me because of my conception of God, actually. Again, you're making me think these things through for the first time. I never thought this. But that's part of what was going on there. I longed for a way of engaging the divine that answered to the solemnity that was required by that. And I
love what you
wanted
said.
that.
It's almost like you're an Anglican theologian as a child.
That's why as soon as I walked into an Episcopal church, I was like, at almost 30 years old, I was like, oh,
yeah,
this is that thing. This is it. So like it was just immediate recognition. In fact, they were starting newcomers. They were starting a confirmation, they were starting for the catechumenate.
yeah.
And for that day, and I said, I'm going, and I said, you can do it next year. And so but I did it the next year.
Yeah, it's funny. We have so many people when we start preparing for baptisms at Easter, in Lent, who will just be there for the first time, for the first day, and they'll hear the call and they'll join the class, and it's so interesting. We baptized, I think, 25 people at the Easter Vigil or something like that, and I think there's a way in which that the beauty and the solemnity and the ritual, it places us in the presence of God. We become conscious of something that we had a sense for, but it gives it a new articulation in our life.
And that's we're going to talk about Anglican theology. But one of the things I really love about Anglican theology is its embrace of that, of the mystery of God and the irresolvability of God's identity. I think, part of what my own religious upbringing inspired in me was a deep distaste for people who were very confident, not for the people, I'm sorry, for perspectives that are overly confident in being able to describe God. And because it didn't describe God as I knew God, that's for sure. And so it was very off-putting for that people seemed to be able to be so darn certain about who and what God is, and God always seemed to be an entailment of the world rather than the creator of it. And even as a child, that just intuitively didn't make any sense to me, that God was in the world, a part of the world, or it didn't make any sense to me. And so it didn't ring true.
Yeah, I totally know what you mean. I think it's partly holding kind of a minority perspective in terms of Christian outlook, and so it's hard to find people who share that sense of God's mystery in particular. But
it's deeply. Oh, go ahead. No, please.
No.
All I was going to say is it's deeply ancient. I mean, this was not a notion until the 16th. Maybe the 17th century. It begins with the Enlightenment and the notion of a kind of positivistic understanding of the way that the universe is constructed, and that everything is knowable and everything has got a material basis, or it's just fluff and not true. And this is that disenchantment that we talk about. And of course, contemporary Protestantism is an outgrowth of modernism. So it doesn't always do the job that it could do, embracing that mystery, because the Protestant movement has tended historically to see that as overly patristic and worse, overly medieval. And so it is not a particularly embraced notion in Protestantism. So that's been part of part of Protestantism's historical theological baggage. It's difficult to embrace the mystery of God in some ways because of the way it is constructed. theologically in its imagination.
Were there other interests that you had, or things that you were when you were a child and a young adulthood that kind of helped inform your theological perspective?
Yeah, it's funny you asked that. I'm writing a chapter for a volume on Episcopal theologians right now, and I was just thinking about all of this because I'm working on that, and it was the arts, and I was a theater director for a while, and that's what my undergraduate degree was in, and that's what I did when I first got out of school. But what I was doing was using performance as a way of creating ritual. I was using very stylized chamber type theater that was exploring mystery and poetry through movement and sound and texture and vocal intonation and and I was using some Japanese theater forms of no theater and kabuki and bunraku and things like this, and sort of marrying that with like the Western symbolist tradition and and people like Yeats who was doing that long before I was, and so all of this kind of thing, and thinking through like what does it mean to use performance as a kind of aestheticized engagement with the transcendent. And what I ended up like, I called my theater company the Monastery, and what I was doing was ritualizing my way back into an engagement with theology proper. And so I in fact left theater in one reason for that was, if I said to myself, look, if you're going to take on a very difficult life as a theater artist, it better be for the right reasons, because that's not a life to take on wantonly, because it asks everything of you. So make sure you're doing it for the right reasons. And I realized I wasn't. I was trying to pray through it, and that's not a reason for me to do theater. So I was like, well, then let me go back and rethink my engagement with God and with the church, and that's what I did.
So Scott, in some future date, I would love to work on this with you. But I mean, I just think you have all these. We have 10,000 Episcopal churches. I know more than that. Episcopal churches across the country. And what would it be like if we really made theater more of a central part of what we do together? Because we have all these incredible actors and theater experts who don't have an audience. And then what would it be like if it was much more a central part of church life?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there is a reason why ritual studies, performance studies, and liturgical studies have a lot of overlap.
Yeah, definitely. That's definitely true. You talked a little bit about, just your experience in first entering an Episcopal church.
Right.
Can you talk a little bit about just like what is an Anglican, and then what are kind of the strengths and weaknesses of that expression of Christianity?
Well, that's a good way to start, because I can only give an account of that. I mean, there is no definitive account. I mean, there's a technical account of that. An Anglican is any practicing Christian who identifies with a church body that traces its roots to the Church of England. So that's in the very most bloodless, uninteresting, technical definition of what an Anglican is. So in the United States, that of course is the Episcopal Church in sort of its formal Anglican expression as a member of the Worldwide Anglican Communion. But there are other expressions of Anglicanism in the United States as well that have over time separated from that body and have formed denominations that are Anglican in their ethos and in their outlook, in their practice, most of them use the Book of Common Prayer that even if it's the 1662 or another version of the Book of Common Prayer, but they are not at this point in communion with the See of Canterbury, with the and therefore not members of the Anglican Communion. But I don't think that makes them less Anglican in their identity. It just makes them less Anglican in the political sense, in terms of polity. But not in their theology.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought them up. I mean, in the church I served in Los Altos, there were 3 churches that had been founded by Episcopal priests, 2 Anglican churches, and a church that served primarily immigrants from the Middle East. But it was, I mean, to be in a town where there's 4 Episcopal churches or having some sensibility, some connection to that Anglican, it definitely, it's good to be reminded that just because they're not going to General Convention in every 3 years, that doesn't mean that they're not part of this big experiment.
I think that's right. And also with the changes at the level of the Anglican Communion, especially with the quite real possibility that the next Archbishop of Canterbury may not be British, that there's going to be a rethink of what it means to be a member of the communion, perhaps. And so we might see a closer, some sort of rapprochement between these other Anglican groups and the global Anglican Communion. It's not inconceivable.
Yeah. So do you think it would ever be possible that, say, the Anglican Church in the United States would be the authority, the recognized authority, and that the Episcopal Church would be like demoted somehow?
I mean, I suppose it's possible if the Episcopal Church somehow attenuated such that there was just a massive population overwhelm, in the sense that the bulk of the expression of Anglicanism in the United States was on that side of the denominational spectrum. But I don't know that that's likely.
Yeah,
I think
it's not likely. I mean, just think of the population of Anglicans who are not Episcopalians in the Bay Area. It's just it's a tiny fraction.
Yeah. Exactly. And there are all these really hopeful signs. It's something I would like to have. I would like to track at some point, where there are a number of Anglican and Episcopal parishes that have reunited, and it is one of the most hopeful and beautiful ecclesiological. I'm trained as an ecclesiologist. I study what church is and what church means, particularly in the Anglican context. And so, as an Anglican ecclesiologist, to watch Anglican congregations and Episcopalian congregations merge is one of the most concrete and lovely signs of communion that I can imagine.
Yeah, I feel the same way. Every time I go to a new town to serve as a priest, I always get to know the local Anglican church leaders too. And yeah, because there's something beautiful about what we share, and we share so much in common in terms of that sensibility that you do so well at describing in your book. But, so now let's talk a little bit about just like, what are the strengths and weaknesses of Anglicanism as a kind of religious expression?
Well, and again, this is other Anglican theologians and historians are going to put all this differently than I do. And I think, and that is part of what it means, how we think of Anglicanism. It is very contested. Nobody has the lock on what it means to be Anglican, who's an Anglican, what Anglican theology is, whether Anglican theology has some special content to it that's different from the way that other Christians have thought over time. It is none of it is settled, and part of that is a legacy of our founding, and the coming out of the very specific conditions that gave rise to the split between the church in England and the Roman Catholic Church to give rise to what became the Church of England eventually. But it wasn't neat, it wasn't tidy, and because of that, there are many, many different strands of Anglicanism, and they share some things, but they also look really different. And so characterizing things in the aggregate becomes very difficult, and that's what the big problem with the book that I wrote on Anglican theology is how could I try to describe the character of Anglican theology broadly enough that hopefully most Anglicans would see themselves reflected, or their church's understanding of theology reflected in it. And that's what I tried to do. Whether successfully or not, it remains to be seen. And plus, there are other ways of construing and framing the whole debate that could have done it differently. So with that said, that this is only an account and not the account, and I would never try to claim that it is the account of what Anglicanism's strengths and weaknesses are. My view is that Anglicanism over time has, as we were saying before, embraced a sense of, it's paradoxical, embraced a sense of realism about who God is, such that because God is a mystery, what we say about God is probably going to be partial and fallible and not 100% accurate all the time, and conditioned by time and space, and so on. And so Anglicanism at its best is strong in that it precisely doesn't prescribe what we have to say about God in many ways. Now there are limitations on that, and I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about that. I think when I talk about Anglican theology, I talk about a set of boundaries within which Anglicanism is free to roam theologically. So we can't just say anything. That would just be chaos, and there are certain things about God we wouldn't, if our job is to identify who God is, and we say God is the God that demands the blood of the infidel or the unfaithful or something of this nature, that's something we can't, there is no ground for saying that. And all of our boundary markers would say, first of all, what's an infidel? And secondly, God doesn't demand anybody's blood. And so there would be some boundaries that we put on this. And those are the creeds, the creedal attestations, the scriptures, and the other, that which is entailed in celebrating the sacraments of baptism and Eucharist. So the logic of baptism and Eucharist, along with our scriptures and the creeds, condition what we might and might not say about God. But within all of those, that's a pretty tremendous set of possibilities that are constellated between those markers. So there's a lot that we can say about God, and have said and will say, and nobody has the direct line to the divine to be able to say, hey, who's got this right? It's too varied for that. And that is a major strength, I think, of Anglicanism and its embrace of God as mystery. It's that it's not an anything goes, and at the same time, our consciences are not held captive by a set of doctrine or a figure from the past that determines what we're able to say theologically about what is true with respect to God, who we are, and how we're to live. So that's something that we wrestle with. That goes to the wisdom question that you raised when you framed the conversation. That the wisdom that we need is the wisdom to move faithfully in a very complex world where we know very little for certain about God, about our world, about ourselves, about our hearts. It's more complicated than clear. And so we do the best that we can, given the witness of the faith, those who've gone before, those who walk alongside us now, to discern, good Anglican word, to discern a way to live in our times and places, contexts, historical and cultural specificities, and our bodies, our specific bodies that we inhabit, or that we are, that we don't, those are not meaningless ciphers. Those are what this all is about. Those specifics are the only way we know who God is. The only way we come to experience or encounter God is in those specific conditions. And so we are called to navigate them with some humility, given that we don't have a God's eye view of all of those things. So it's a faithful struggle, which is why I really think Jacob Jacob's name is Israel. There's a reason why Israel is the people that struggles with its creator and is blessed and hobbled by that. It's an important image.
We talked a little bit about just like the disenchantment of nature and the disenchantment of the world. I think of Charles Taylor as,
Yeah.
the sources of the self. And maybe you could talk a little bit about philosophers, theologians, writers who have especially influenced you or whose thought you particularly appreciate.
Well, oh my goodness. So in terms of, it's so much easier for me to say who, sadly, who I dislike rather than who I like.
Great. I'd be interested in hearing that because that has changed for me.
Yeah.
So who do you see yourself in opposition to?
So that's a good way of putting this. Who do I see myself trying to be in conversation with and to sort of push back on? I think there's a certain kind of, I hope this isn't being academic-y and jargony, but there's a certain kind of reductionist materialism that I really push back against. And this is the idea that all that's really real is what we can know materially and what we can experience materially. That the material is the place we go to test hypotheses about how reality is constructed. But what this leaves out is that there are things that transcend the material alone. I mean, even a good cognitive neuroscientist will tell you where consciousness is more than the sum total of synapses firing in our minds. There's something that transcends that. There is a phenomenal real. So in terms of the philosophers that are the ones who impress me most, it's the phenomenologists, especially Merleau-Ponty, who I really find great resonance with. People like Wittgenstein in terms of the way that language functions and the way that practices come to shape us. And therefore, I do see Taylor as an important person here. Charles Taylor is an important person here. And I see myself really reacting against a sort of propositionalist understanding of that. Oh, I'm trying not to get jargony. That there's an objective truth out there that we can just lay hold of, describe with true false statements, or worse, with plain old math, and with symbolic logic, and we've solved the problem. And there are plenty of people who have an analytic philosophical mind who I respect deeply, 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 deeply. Sarah Coakley being a major one.
She was my teacher.
I know, and I think that and we have a deep tradition, for example, of Anglican Platonism and Catherine Pickstock and people like this that do think that there's a way that we can argue with clear ideas from first principles and deduce things about. I just don't. I just have a hard time with metaphysics. I have a really hard time with metaphysics. And I have a really hard time with existentialism, particularly of the Tillichian variety, which I find overly confirmatory of the world as it is and not sufficiently questioning in terms of the world as it might be. It seems more descriptive than normative, and I think that is dangerous. And especially for Tillich, who, given the Nazi threat, feels like he should have known better than that. And so I become more Barthian on that side than Tillichian for sure. Yeah.
I'm preaching about Emmanuel Levinas tomorrow, just back to the phenomenologist.
The face that arises before us is the one to whom we owe everything. And like, if an incredibly profound Jewish thinker who says the most Christian thing imaginable, that the face of the other makes the claim on us that's dearer than our own lives. And like, it's it can bring you to tears, like thinking about somebody saying that at a time like this moment that we're living in, where the face of the other is to mock or banish to the outer darkness for so many.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about just like, how did you become a theologian? Like, how did you get this idea to become a theological thinker, and just what was seminary, or what was your training like in terms of just like your doctoral program, and so your ideal of being a theologian, and then what it actually turned out to be.
Yeah. So I was working on this chapter that I was telling you about, where I was talking about theater and that kind of thing. I've always been a theologian. I've never not been a theologian. I've always wrestled with God and who God. So my view of theology is that theology is only asks three questions. It only asks who God is, who we are, and what that means for how we should live. That's all that it is. And we overcomplicate that, but that's all that it is. And so I've always been asking that question, and my arts work was asking that question, and my investigation of literature was asking that question. And then when I moved into doing comparative theology, it was asking that question. And then when I moved back into actually a life of a believer and being in the church and all that kind of thing, I realized if I'm really going to give myself over to this, if I'm really going to do the catechumenate, then I need to understand, like, what is the thought structure that I'm signing up for. And that's when I went to do theology proper. When I really wanted to get trained in what a Christian theologian, because, I was told when I was 12 years old that I'm the kind of person that Satan loves because I'm an intellectual. So I knew that theology had no use for an idea like that. And I had no use for an idea like that. I found that to be incorrect. And so I went into the study of theology with the notion that ancient theological wisdom has something to teach us, which we have to receive critically, but we need that. We need what came before us. We need that ongoing conversation of God with God's people. God didn't stop speaking, but there's different ways of doing this. And theology is one of the ways in which, and theological research is one of the ways in which that communication remains. So that's what I went back to study. And so my view of what is theology, it really did change over time, because I had to first learn what this ongoing, I used to tell students, and it's true, and the reason I can say this is because I went through it too. It's like, I don't know if you've ever begun watching a soap opera that's been going on for years, but if your soap opera that you just discovered has been going on for 2 decades and you pick it up, there's a whole reality behind all of that you're like stuck into the middle of a conversation that's being had and stories that are being had, and like all of these different relationships that are in the background of all of this that you've got to get up to speed on, and that doesn't happen overnight. It takes a minute. And with theology, which is hopefully less glib than a soap opera, you really need to spend time understanding those conversations and not rejecting them out of hand, because there are some problematic things about some of the theologians that we don't always love, like Augustine. Like, he has a lot to teach us, and he is more than his bad approach to sexuality. And that's a hard sell for people, where it's all or nothing. But there is so much wisdom. I mean, look at the ceiling of St. Gregory of Nyssa to see, there are problematic people on that ceiling that everything about them we would not take on board in terms of, but they are saints.
Yeah, Malcolm X is on the wall, and it was his 100th birthday on Monday, and going back and looking at, there was a misogynistic part of him too.
Absolutely,
a liberatory part and a constrained part. And you're right. I mean, there we all are. He's holding hands with Queen Elizabeth I, who is in the same boat.
Yeah, we're all products of our time. This is, again, what Anglicanism at its best wants to affirm, is that we, like Paul, we must embrace the humility to say we only see through a glass dimly.
Yeah.
We don't know. Like, I'm also, so another thing that I am is my theology has two main focuses, as you know from my work, is the church
Yeah.
and eschatology, the study of the thought, the imagination that we have of what God is up to in terms of God's future. What does God have in store for this cosmos and for us in it? And one of those things is that we don't have knowledge of God this side of the completion of all things. Everything is imperfect. Everything, every person is imperfect. Every relationship is imperfect. Every moment is imperfect. It's beautiful. It can be lovely and gorgeous and filled with transcendent grace, truth, and every other wonderful quality you would want to ascribe to it. But it's also broken because our world is broken. And so our knowledge is partial, especially our knowledge of God, of all things, and of the ways of God, and of what God is calling us to be and do in any particular time and place. I think Bonhoeffer is a wonderful example of what it means to struggle with what are we being called to do in any given moment, and throwing yourself on faith that you're going to do the best you can do given these circumstances, and trust that God's mercy will be enough to see you through.
Yeah.
Without any guarantees.
Oh, I know. Without any, talk a little bit about like your students, what they're like, and then just like how you learned how to teach, and then especially, I mean, moving things online. I would love to hear your take on, just kind of limitations of that, or how you learned how to do it.
So that's a lot in there.
There is. There's like three
But
big questions.
a lot of questions there. So how to teach? Who taught me to teach? In many ways, I'll probably, in many ways, when I teach, I try to be Elizabeth Johnson as much as I can be.
Yeah, neat.
She was my teacher at Fordham, and she's the writer of, most famously, of She Who Is, which was like one of the groundbreaking books of feminist theology, a doctrine of God from a feminist perspective. And her career is much larger than that, but that is what she is famous, what made her famous.
Yeah.
But what should have made her famous is her generosity of theological spirit and her nurturing spirit and in the classroom, despite the fact that she can destroy you in like a nanosecond if you step out of line, get above your station or whatever the case. But she wouldn't.
Yeah.
She wouldn't. She's way more interested in developing and seeing what seeds are sown and what can be brought forward and what can be created and what can be made anew. Tough, because she pushes too, and I try to be like that. I didn't always succeed, but I try. So I try to be very dialogical in the classroom, and that's been part of the problem with. So I taught asynchronously before teaching on Zoom, online, because we had a program where there was an asynchronous hybrid program, and so students would engage in learning theology, which is the most dialogical discipline I can imagine, by listening to me blather and then writing for their lives. And I think it wasn't the worst, but it's really hard to it's really difficult, I think, still, even though I thought it was done relatively successfully because of the way I tried to structure the course with various engagements back and forth over the course of a week, as opposed to all out, all in, move on. So I tried to make it dialogical as much as I possibly could, but the best way to do theology always is conversationally, because it is itself a conversation. It's a conversation with God and a conversation about God. So it's always best done conversationally. So that was a little difficult. Zoom is better actually than asynchronous in that sense, because you can actually have exchanges in real time. But
Yeah, I totally agree. We started preaching in front of cameras,
Yeah.
and gosh, I mean, it's just you get
It's so
so
different.
much back from people that they don't even realize that they're giving you. Like they're giving you like cues about whether they're interested or not, or whether they're kind of ready for you to move on to the next point. I mean,
It's so true. Plus, I mean, I'm as a theologian who studies bodies, because I studied the ecclesial body, but I also just talk eschatologically. I talk about our bodies. Embodiment is crucial to theology and crucial to to dialogue and crucial to communion.
yeah,
And so that we preach online is one thing. That we resist any inclination to do Eucharist online is, I
yeah.
think, really important.
I think that's so important too. Hey, so there's Facebook, Instagram,
Yeah.
Twitter. I mean, how's are these new technologies changing how people have those kinds of theological dialogue?
How are they changing it? Well, I think for myself, part of the issue for myself is that I never knew a theological world without those things because of where I came in, when I came in
Yeah, right.
to doing it. For the most part, I mean, that's not totally true. I started my master's program before there was Facebook, for example, I'm pretty sure. But I think you find your people more easily with social media. That's true, but it polarizes as well. I think we're not immune to the kind of polarization that takes place in the larger body politic. People will say, I'm sure you've heard the jokes about Catholic Twitter, but Episcopal Facebook is not any better. That's for
I
sure.
haven't even heard the jokes about Catholic Twitter. That's how backward I am.
It's a, it can be a very contentious
I'll try to remember to Google it.
place. And the Episcopal social media sphere can be a pretty contentious place too. But the thing about it is it's because we care about it so damn
Yeah,
much.
right. So true.
And when you're not actually embodied face to face with another human being, it's really easy to treat them in a disembodied way. And I think that lends itself to abuse. It lends itself to treating people like they're just a nameless, faceless account on a screen and not human.
Yeah.
And not a co-religionist, which is worse. So like I think and I'm guilty. Like I get really wrapped up in my own views and caring about these things because they matter so much. I mean, one of the things I kept saying to students is like, look, you need to think carefully theologically because theology kills.
Right.
And that's not a metaphor.
Yeah. That's
It's walking around with explosives. And if you trip with an armful of explosives, you're going to kill yourself and other people.
yeah.
And if you trip with an armful of bad theology, you're going to kill yourself and other people.
That's so true.
And so like I care about whether or not you're getting it and whether or not you have thought through the implications of what it is that you are giving back to me. So I can get really worked up about those things, and so I get trapped in it too. I get caught up myself.
Yeah, one of the questions I've just been feeling like AI has just been accelerating and just changing fundamentally in the way we use it. I think we had the sense that, oh yeah, the AI is going to write sermons in the future, and now we're realizing no, AI is going to tell you where you can find the section in Karl Barth that's in Church Dogmatics where he talks about atonement. You know what I mean? It's a completely different. So can you talk a little bit about what you see AI doing and just like what does it mean for somebody who's in the humanities?
It's so interesting that you're asking me this. I'm on the Episcopal Church's task force on AI and intellectual property, and I'm on the AI portion of that. So I've been thinking about this quite a bit.
I'm writing a paper on AI and preaching for Pacific Coast Theology.
Oh, nice. Okay, good. Well, send it on to me because I could use it when we have our meetings. I think the jury is still out because the jury, in many, many ways, because the jury is out on AI. And so we're not even of one voice and one opinion, on this on this committee at this point because we're still gathering lots and lots of information, and we come from all different fields. I'm on it as a theologian, particularly to think about this from the perspective of what it means to be human. So what does it mean that we use these tools from the perspective of being human, and from the perspective of ministry? What does it mean to use these tools to minister to those humans? And so the idea of writing a sermon based that ChatGPT has generated is quite frightening for a number of reasons, not the least of which is how much it just parrots what you want to hear, and it begins to know what you want to hear, and that is precisely what preaching isn't.
Right, exactly. The definition of it.
It's supposed to make you uncomfortable.
Yeah.
It's supposed to make you re-examine, to take some critical distance with what it is that you already think and what you think you know and how you think you are best to be in the world and so on. It's provocative. And so that's a problem. The other part of it is that even when you put really careful constraints on something like ChatGPT, for example, and say you can only draw from the following sources, it doesn't do that. Yeah. And so it'll make stuff up. And that's not reliable, first of all. So it's not even reliable as, for example, where can I find this in church dogmatics?
It's totally wrong with that too.
Yeah. If you said to ChatGPT, tell me what's in Church Dogmatics Volume 15, it would give you a summary. Yeah. But there is no Volume 15.
Yeah.
So it's not the panacea that I think that people are looking for. It is not the solution that you're looking for. It's like it's not. Anyway, we don't want to get too far down that road. I know people have questions about things and all that sort of stuff, but I do not see AI, especially an uncritical adoption of the use of AI as very helpful at all. And in fact, quite the opposite. To do routine tasks is one thing. To ask it to create things, it scares the pants off me. Yeah. It really frightens me in terms of what that already, Malcolm, in my teaching career, I have seen the capacity of students go down and down and down and down. Yeah. From how much they can read, how much they can write, how critical they're able to be, how nuanced. And with AI regurgitating plug and play text that you can then use to complete your work, where is the critical faculty going to come from? Where is the ability to think from an expert? So one of the things that people are saying now is that the AI is used best by subject experts who are able to look at what the AI has produced and say, okay, this is helpful and this is absolute garbage.
Right.
But where's the subject expertise going to come from if everything is being generated quick and easy? You're not going to develop any subject expertise. Yeah, because you'll think it's not necessary.
Yeah. So I was talking to my clergy group this week, and we were noticing that it's the 1700th anniversary of the Council of Nicaea, yes. From May to August, so we're in the middle of it. Yes. And I wonder if you can talk a little bit about what a creed is, how it affects people doing ministry. What does a creed make possible for us, and what are the shortcomings and strengths of creeds?
That's excellent. So, okay, so one of the things that's really important to remember is that there's a big difference between a creed and a confession. And not everybody knows the difference between those two things, but it makes a difference because in the Anglican tradition, we subscribe to the creeds very strongly. They feature in our worship. The Nicene Creed is the Eucharistic Creed that we use, and the Apostles' Creed is the baptismal creed, the vows that we take. About which we believe, and then we renew as the congregation when we participate in the baptisms of others. So those are very, very, very important. What they are ancient formulations of belief. They're scripturally based to say, in the Nicene version, we, the body of Christ, believe the following things about God. And they're set up in a Trinitarian formula. So you've got what you believe about God, Christ, and the Holy Spirit. And there's a variety of things that are attested to underneath each of those beliefs. In the Apostles' Creed, it's I believe, because it's the baptismal formula. So you're saying, I believe in God, I believe in Jesus Christ, I believe in the Holy Spirit. So it's Trinitarian as well. Some of the same kinds of ascriptions that you're making in both creeds, but slightly different, and they're couched slightly differently. And they're very ancient, right? So they're the Apostles' Creed is older than the Nicene Creed. And the Nicene Creed is, as you just said, 1,700 years old this year. So it is. These are old, and they are also the only. They're in many ways the only thing that binds undivided Christianity together. There's something that East and West, we still say them. We still organize our lives around them. There are non-creedal Protestants who don't say any of the creeds. So that is a difference. But in large part, Christianity, both East and the Orthodox, the Catholics, the Protestants, the Anglicans, we all say the Apostles' Creed, the Nicene Creed. There's also the Athanasian Creed, which is a Trinitarian creed. It's in our prayer book, but we almost never use it. It's something that might come out on Trinity Sunday, but it's a very technical creed and really focused on Athanasius' defense of the doctrine of the Trinity. So that's really what that is. A confession, by contrast, is what marks one denomination off from another. So it is a set of beliefs that are different from other people's beliefs. So you'd have, for example, the Westminster Confession of Faith among the Reformed, where this is a set of Calvinist understandings of who God is and how we are as Calvinists that are points of faith that organize the way that you think about your life of faith differently than from those who do not subscribe to that confession. So the creeds are part of that set of boundary markers I was talking about that set the limits on what we can and cannot say. And what's wonderful about that is where we have these very high level ascriptions, to use the word I've been using over, like there should be a different word for this, ascriptions about God, tenets, such that, like, I believe in God, we believe in God, the God Almighty, creator of heaven and earth. That's the article about God. Then it moves to Jesus. But what does that say? We says that there is a creator that is the creator of everything. That's it.
Yeah.
That's all. So we're free to flesh that out in a whole variety of different ways. What we are not free to say is that there is no God, that God didn't create, and God didn't make everything that is. So those are the things that it disallows us from saying. But it prescribes extremely little. We are able to fill that in. How does God create? Does God create out of nothing? What is included in all of this? Is it the entire cosmos? Is it the one part of the multiverse that we're in? Like, all these different kinds of things, right? So it leaves these questions open. And that's by design, right? Especially with the Nicene Creed, which is meant to be a conciliatory umbrella gathering kind of device for people in contention. It's resolving some conflict. So it's meant to include under its wings a number of viewpoints. So it's not going to resolve those things. So if Jesus Christ is fully God, it doesn't say how. It does not say how Jesus Christ is God, and so on and so forth. So the creeds are a skeleton, a skeletal framework that holds our life of faith secure. But it doesn't prescribe it. It doesn't say this is how you have to fill out how you believe all of these things. And finally, one more thing I would say about a creed is because they're communal, they're held by all of us, which means if there are parts that we struggle with, even if we aren't there creedally some days, we can trust that the church is, and that is holding us, even when we can't say with full throat, I believe the following thing, or we believe the following thing. And I'm totally on board with that. I have no questions, Your Honor. Like I don't that we do this as the church holds us even in our unbelief, even in our doubts, even in our struggle. That's another thing about creeds, is that sometimes it can be, I believe, help my unbelief.
Yeah.
Like the man who comes to Jesus and asks for that. Yeah. The creeds are helping you. They're helping support you in your, even when you struggle, even when you're doubting, even when you're unsure.
One of the traditions we have for the forum is we actually take questions from our audience, and we have some questions here. The first one is, do you think Twitter, etc., is shortening theological argumentations beyond recognition?
Beyond recognition? No, I don't. I mean, I think part of, you could make an argument in some ways that a tweet is no different than a proposition from the old days where you'd throw back these propositions back and forth. No, I don't. I think that it's a symptom rather than Twitter. The Twitter and the use of Twitter is a symptom. Twitter is not a cause. So I think we have a, especially in the United States, we have a deeply anti-intellectual culture, and Twitter does not help that.
Okay, here's the next sentence. In the U.S., so this is not me, this is somebody out there. In the U.S., at least, the Episcopal Church appears more socially active than other Protestants. What is it in our theology or values or character that compels us to action?
I love that. Okay, so one of the things that that the Anglican theological ethos really cares about is concrete particularity. It cares about people, their lived lives. It cares about being pastoral and ministering to the real hurts and tribulations of the world. If you think about the Oxford movement, for example, it was a deep engagement with the Anglican past that impelled the Oxford priests to go to the slums. It wasn't either or, it was both and. It's this notion that, well, because Anglicanism is also a highly incarnational faith, it really cares that God became human. It really cares that God became flesh. It really cares that the divine entered the material. And so the church needs to do those same things as disciples of Christ. If we worship God incarnate, then we need to incarnate God in the world. And you can only do that by going out into the world and doing as Jesus did. And that is, the Anglican social witness runs very deep, and it's a huge and lovely tradition that I wish, you could do a whole series on this because it's so part of the heritage of what it means to be Anglican. Not always, of course. Just like any denomination, there are times when Anglicanism has been very quietistic and very pietistic and it's withdrawn and become closed off from the world in some ways. But by and large, Anglicanism engages the world because it understands that engagement as mirroring God's own approach to what God has made. So that's deeply ingredient in the Anglican theological understanding.
In the very end of your book, The Shape of Anglican Theology, you talk about these new Anglican theologians who are working on systematic theology. So
yes.
Sonderegger, Graham Ward, Sarah Coakley, and another figure who I don't know very well.
Yeah.
So talk a little bit about about what that is, what that impulse is, and where do you think things are going? Like, what is the future of Anglican theology?
Well, it's hard. It's always in motion is the future. It's hard to know what. I've been very Yoda today. I don't know why. Anglican theology is always been very protean. Right? It changes shape based on its, which is again another reason why I don't want to nail down this is what Anglican theology is and should always be. It's not that. It always should be moving because the world is always moving and our understanding of God is always moving. Traditionally, Anglican theologians have not written multi-volume systematic theologies along the lines of Lutheran and Reformed theologians, the way that they have done that. That is changing. The question is whether or not they're doing that in the same way that quote unquote systematic theologies have been done in the past. And that remains to be seen because the projects are ongoing. These are underway. Now, I think my assessment is that Sarah Coakley and Graham Ward, in particular, are extremely Anglican in the way that they do what they do. Sonderegger is as well, of course, because of her location as a theologian in the Episcopal Church, but as a Bartian and as a really devoted Bartian and a highly intelligent and smart and faithful Bartian, praying Bartian, there is a bit more of a lean toward a reformed kind of dogmatics that is more in evidence in Sonderegger's version of systematic theology than in Coakley and Ward, for example. Ralph McMichael is working on a liturgical Eucharistic inflected one that's also very Anglican. So I don't know. I mean, but you know, I don't know. It's hard to say. I'm going to just stop because I know there's other questions. But it's hard to say where this is going to go. One of the big things I hope for is that we have more theologians from the majority world that are going to start talking about what Anglican theology means in that context. So we have Anglican theologies being written from Oceania and from Australia, from Africa, from all parts of the world. What I'm hoping is that more Anglican theologians from those places will start talking about what it means to do theology Anglicanly in those contexts, which is what I've been having a really difficult time finding. So I can find the theology, but I can't find the theologians reflecting on theologizing. That's the thing that I'm having trouble finding, and I hope we get more of that, which would be really important contribution to the unfolding of the Anglican theological imagination. I think that's really, really important.
Yeah,
Bishop James Tangatanga talks about this as theological indaba, and I really hope that indaba is enriched in the years ahead.
Yeah, me too. You know, we you can't hear it but the bells just rang. We've run out of time, but it's been such a delight to see you, Scott.
Oh, thank you.
And, you know, I hope the next time you're in town, we can get together. Maybe we just do a forum in person too, because I feel like we have so much more to say. Just scratch the surface. I'm just so grateful for all that you shared with us today.
Well, thank you. It was truly my pleasure. Was a delight, and I'm super, super honored that you asked me to do it. So thank you.
Yeah, sure. For everybody else, this is the final forum of the spring season. Please look for announcements about our fall season, which will start in September. We rely on your support for the forum. Gifts of any size make a difference. There are many ways to give, including texting the word THINK, THINK, to the number 76278. And again, Scott, so great to see you. What a blessing to have you working on behalf of the church, and we're looking forward to seeing what you uncover in the future.
Thank you so much, Dean Malcolm. I really appreciate it.